Jessica gripped the edge of the marble sink, her trembling fingers pressing into the cold stone. The laughter of the party echoed down the hallway, but it felt a world away. Her reflection stared back at her, a face she barely recognized. Behind her, Stefan leaned lazily against the doorway, a glass of champagne in hand, his voice dripping with venom. "You're nothing without me," he hissed, his smile razor-sharp, as if daring her to challenge him. The weight of his words, spoken so casually in front of their guests moments earlier, felt like a dagger twisting in her chest. But this time was different. For the first time in years, Jessica felt something stir within her, a defiance that refused to be silenced. Jessica Adams had it all: beauty, intelligence, and a career most women dreamed of. At 32, she was the head of an investment firm in New York City, known for her sharp instincts and impeccable track record. Her family, the Adams, were old money, a name synonymous with wealth and power. Her father, Richard Adams, was a financial titan, and her mother, Victoria, was a renowned art collector. Despite her success, Jessica had always been searching for something more, something that money couldn't buy. That's when she met Stefan Daniels at a charity gala. Stefan, an architect with striking blue eyes and a charm that could disarm anyone, was unlike anyone Jessica had ever met. He was attentive, witty, and seemed genuinely interested in her. He didn't care about her last name or her bank account, or so she thought. Their whirlwind romance blossomed quickly. Jessica was swept off her feet by Stefan's grand gestures and sweet words. He made her feel seen in a way she hadn't before, but there were warning signs she missed. Stefan always seemed to steer conversations back to his financial struggles or his big dreams of starting his own firm. Jessica, blinded by love, happily supported him, seeing it as an investment in their future together. Jessica's parents were less than thrilled about her relationship with Stefan. Richard saw through Stefan's charm immediately, calling him a gold digger in disguise. Victoria, while more polite, shared her husband's concerns. "Are you sure about this, darling?" Victoria asked as they sipped tea in the garden one afternoon. Jessica smiled, twirling the diamond engagement ring on her finger. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life, Mom. Stefan loves me for who I am, not for what I have." Despite their reservations, the Adams threw a lavish wedding for their daughter. The event was the talk of the city, with celebrities, politicians, and business tycoons in attendance. Jessica looked radiant in her custom-designed gown, and Stefan played the role of the devoted husband perfectly. But as the guests toasted to their future, Richard Adams sat at the head table, his expression grim. The honeymoon phase didn't last long. Within months of their marriage, Stefan's true colors began to show. It started with little things: him questioning Jessica's friends, criticizing her wardrobe, and making sarcastic comments about her work. "You're always busy," he'd say with a pout. "Don't you care about us?" Jessica brushed it off as him adjusting to their new life. But soon, his behavior escalated. He began isolating her from her friends, insisting they didn't have her best interests at heart. "You don't need them," he'd say. "I'm all you need." Jessica found herself withdrawing from the people who had always supported her. One evening, Stefan suggested merging their finances. "It just makes sense," he said with a charming smile. "We're a team now." Jessica hesitated, but eventually agreed, wanting to prove her trust in him. It wasn't long before Stefan began taking liberties with her money, buying expensive cars, designer clothes, and throwing extravagant parties. When Jessica tried to confront him about it, Stefan turned the tables. "Why are you so controlling?" he snapped. "It's just money. You can make more, can't you?" Jessica felt her confidence begin to erode under Stefan's manipulation. It happened on a chilly evening, the kind of night that made the city's skyscrapers shimmer against the dark sky. Jessica had just gotten home from a long day at the office, her heels clicking against the marble floors as she walked into the living room. Stefan was waiting for her, sprawled on the couch with a glass of whiskey in hand, his eyes sharp and accusatory. "You're late," he said, his voice low but tinged with anger. Jessica sighed, setting her bag down. "I had a meeting that ran over. I told you this morning." He didn't respond immediately, swirling his whiskey as if trying to keep his temper in check. Then he stood, his tall frame looming over her. "You always have a meeting," he spat. "What about us, Jess? Or do I only matter when it's convenient for you?" "I'm doing this for us, Stefan," she replied, trying to keep her voice calm. "You know how important this deal is." But Stefan wasn't interested in explanations. He slammed his glass down on the coffee table, the sound echoing through the room. "I'm tired of hearing about your deals," he shouted. "I'm your husband, Jessica, or have you forgotten that?" Jessica's heart pounded as she tried to defuse the situation. "Stefan, please. Let's talk about this calmly." But calm was the last thing on Stefan's mind. As she reached out to touch his arm, hoping to soothe him, he swatted her hand away with such force that she stumbled back a step. "Don't touch me like I'm some charity case," he growled. Before she could respond, he grabbed her wrist, his grip so tight it felt like her bones might snap. His face was inches from hers, his breath reeking of whiskey. "You think you're so much better than me, don't you?" he hissed. "Always throwing your money around like it makes you invincible." Jessica winced, trying to pull away, but his grip only tightened. Then, in a flash of rage, he shoved her backward. She fell against the edge of the dining table, her hips slamming into the wood. The pain shot through her like a lightning bolt, but it was the betrayal in his eyes that hurt the most. For a moment he stood there, his chest heaving as if he'd just run a marathon. Then, as if realizing what he'd done, he softened. "I didn't mean that," he said, stepping toward her. "I'm sorry, Jess. I just lost my temper." But Jessica saw no remorse in his eyes, only a simmering rage that hadn't quite subsided. She nodded numbly, clutching her side as she stepped around him. That night, as she lay in bed, the bruise on her hip throbbing, Jessica stared at the ceiling, wondering how her life had come to this. The gala was supposed to be a celebration, a showcase of Jessica's firm's accomplishments and a chance to mingle with potential investors. Jessica had spent weeks preparing for the event, ensuring every detail was perfect, but none of her efforts could prepare her for what Stefan had planned. He arrived late, his shirt slightly wrinkled and his eyes bloodshot, evidence of the drinks he'd already consumed. Jessica's colleagues glanced at him curiously, but she brushed it off, forcing a smile as she welcomed him. "Stefan, please behave tonight," she whispered as they stood near the buffet table. He smirked, taking a long sip of champagne. "Relax, darling. I'm just here to support you." For the first hour, he seemed to keep his word, charming the guests with his wit and good looks. But as the evening progressed and the drinks flowed, Stefan's mask began to slip. During Jessica's speech, where she thanked her team and highlighted their latest achievements, Stefan leaned against the bar, loudly laughing and making sarcastic comments. "Oh, look at her," he sneered, his voice carrying over the crowd. "Miss Perfect, saving the world one investment at a time, trying to prove she's better than everyone else. Stupid black bitch." Jessica faltered mid-sentence, her face flushing as the room fell silent. Some of the guests glanced at Stefan, their expressions a mix of confusion and discomfort, while others avoided eye contact entirely. After her speech, Jessica pulled Stefan aside, her patience worn thin. "What are you doing?" she hissed. "You're embarrassing me in front of my colleagues." "Embarrassing you?" he shot back, his voice rising. "You're the one parading around like some self-righteous queen. Maybe if you spent more time at home, I wouldn't have to drink to tolerate this nonsense. Everyone here is looking at me like I'm below you. You dress just to outshine me. Well, I'll show you I'm the boss." Before she could respond, he grabbed a plate of hors d'oeuvres from the table and, with a malicious grin, tipped it over her dress. The crowd gasped as bits of shrimp and sauce clung to her expensive silk gown. Jessica stood frozen, the humiliation burning through her like fire. "Oops," Stefan said mockingly, feigning innocence. "Maybe you should have worn something cheaper." Tears stung Jessica's eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Ignoring the whispers and stares, she excused herself and headed to the restroom, her heart pounding in her chest. Inside the bathroom, she stared at her reflection, the once pristine dress now a mess of stains. The pain and shame threatened to overwhelm her, but as she wiped her face, something inside her shifted. This was the last straw. Jessica returned to the party after cleaning herself up as best as she could. She knew leaving early would only raise questions, and she didn't want to give Stefan the satisfaction of ruining her night completely. With her chin held high, she approached her team and apologized for the scene. But inside, something had broken. As the night dragged on, Stefan continued drinking, laughing loudly, and flirting shamelessly with a few women at the bar. Jessica avoided looking at him, focusing instead on making sure the event ended smoothly. When they finally got home, she locked herself in the bathroom, staring at the bruises forming on her wrist and the dull ache in her side. Tears streamed down her face as she let herself feel the weight of everything. This wasn't love. This wasn't a marriage. For the first time, Jessica allowed herself to imagine a life without Stefan. It was a faint, fragile thought, but it was enough to plant the seed of determination. The next morning, Stefan woke up with a hangover, mumbling apologies that sounded more like excuses. "About last night," he began, pouring himself a cup of coffee. "You know how I get when I drink too much. You shouldn't have pushed me like that, Jess." Jessica stared at him in disbelief. "Pushed you? You humiliated me in front of my colleagues? You poured food on me, Stefan?" He shrugged, sipping his coffee. "It's not a big deal. People forget these things. Besides, you're the one who always wants to play the victim." The callousness of his words cut deep, but Jessica didn't respond. She couldn't waste her energy arguing anymore. Instead, she started making plans. Jessica reached out to her best friend, Clara, someone she hadn't spoken to in months because of Stefan's control. "Jess, I was starting to think you'd forgotten about me," Clara said when she picked up the phone. Jessica hesitated, her voice trembling. "Clara, I need to see you. Can we meet somewhere? I need help." The concern in Clara's voice was immediate. "Of course. Are you okay?" Jessica didn't trust herself to answer, so she simply said, "I'll explain everything when I see you." They met at a quiet cafe downtown, a place Stefan would never think to visit. When Jessica walked in, Clara's face fell. "Jess, what happened to you?" she asked, noting the bruises on Jessica's wrist and the sadness in her eyes. Jessica broke down, telling Clara everything: the abuse, the control, the humiliation. Clara listened, her expression shifting from shock to anger to determination. "You can't stay with him," Clara said firmly. "You're worth so much more than this." Jessica nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I know, but I don't know where to start." "Start by getting your finances in order," Clara advised. "You need to be able to stand on your own 2 feet before you leave, and you need a plan." Jessica took Clara's advice to heart. Over the next few weeks, she began secretly transferring money into a separate account that Stefan didn't know about. She also met with a lawyer who outlined her options for divorce and helped her understand her rights. At work, Jessica threw herself into her projects, ensuring she maintained her reputation as a top strategist. Her team noticed her renewed focus, but no one suspected the turmoil she was dealing with at home. Stefan, meanwhile, was oblivious. He was too consumed by his own ego to notice Jessica's quiet rebellion. The final straw came on a rainy Friday evening. Stefan had been out all day and returned home reeking of perfume and alcohol. Jessica didn't say a word, but her silence seemed to irritate him. "You've been acting strange lately," he said, slumping onto the couch. "What's your problem?" "No problem," she replied calmly, not looking up from her laptop. He snorted. "You're not as good at hiding things as you think, Jess. What are you up to?" Jessica closed her laptop and stood. "I'm done, Stefan." He laughed, the sound bitter and mocking. "Done with what?" "With you," she said, her voice steady. "I'm leaving." The laughter died on his lips, replaced by a cold fury. "You think you can just walk away from me?" "Yes," she said, her heart pounding. "I've already spoken to a lawyer. I have my own account now. You can't control me anymore." Stefan stood, his expression dark and menacing. "You think you're so smart, don't you? You're nothing without me, Jessica. Nothing." But for the first time in years, Jessica wasn't afraid. "We'll see about that," she said, turning and walking away. Jessica's departure wasn't as smooth as she had hoped. The night she told Stefan she was leaving, he lost control. He grabbed her by the shoulders, shaking her violently, yelling profanities in her face. When she tried to break free, he shoved her against the wall, leaving her gasping for breath. But Jessica had planned for this moment. She had already packed an emergency bag and stored it at Clara's house. She dialed 911 from the bathroom, her trembling fingers barely able to press the buttons. By the time the police arrived, Stefan had smashed a vase in his rage and was screaming about how she was ruining his life. The officers arrested Stefan on charges of domestic violence, giving Jessica the opportunity she needed to leave without looking back. Jessica stayed with Clara for a few weeks while she worked to piece her life back together. It wasn't easy. The trauma of Stefan's abuse lingered, manifesting in nightmares and moments of self-doubt. But with therapy and the unwavering support of her family and friends, she began to heal. She threw herself into her work, earning a promotion that positioned her as one of the top investment strategists in her firm. Her newfound financial independence became a symbol of her resilience. Months later, Jessica had to face Stefan again in court. He tried to manipulate the narrative, painting her as an ungrateful wife who had abandoned him. But the evidence of his abuse, along with the testimony of witnesses, ensured that the judge saw through his lies. The court ruled in Jessica's favor, granting her a divorce and ensuring that Stefan couldn't touch any of her assets. With the divorce finalized, Jessica felt a weight lift from her shoulders. She moved into a new home, a place that was hers and hers alone. She decorated it with bright, cheerful colors, a stark contrast to the sterile, minimalist style Stefan had insisted on. She also reconnected with her parents, who were overjoyed to have their daughter back. Her father, once hesitant about her marriage to Stefan, apologized for not speaking up sooner. "I just wanted you to be happy," he said. Jessica forgave him, understanding that she had made her own choices. Jessica's journey inspired her to do more than just rebuild her own life. She started a nonprofit organization focused on helping women escape abusive relationships and achieve financial independence. Through workshops, mentorship programs, and financial literacy courses, Jessica used her expertise to empower others. Her story gained attention in the media, and she was invited to speak at conferences and events. Each time, she shared her journey with honesty, hoping to reach even one person who needed to hear that it was possible to escape and start over. Years later, Jessica met someone new, Ethan, a kind-hearted teacher with a passion for helping underprivileged kids. Unlike Stefan, Ethan respected her independence and admired her strength. Their relationship blossomed slowly, built on mutual respect and genuine affection. For the first time in years, Jessica felt safe and cherished. Jessica's life became a testament to resilience and hope. She found love, success, and a sense of purpose that she had never known before. Looking back, she didn't regret her journey. The pain she endured had shaped her into the woman she was, strong, compassionate, and unafraid to stand up for herself and others. Her story became a beacon of hope for countless women, proving that it was never too late to take control of your life and create your own happiness.